If you've been with us at all over the last 2 months or so, you know we've been in this series on Daniel for quite a while. Going through the book of Daniel, we've got this week, and then next week we're going to wrap up the series. Next week we're going to look at how to be prepared when faith-filled prayers are required. Have you ever been in those moments when you say, God, if you're ever going to answer my prayer, this is the one I need. Don't miss next Sunday. We're going to talk about how to pray in a way that moves the heart of our Heavenly Father that maybe you've never communicated. So I encourage you to make time, to be sure to be here, join us either in person or online. But this morning, we're going to kind of look at one of the most well-known events in Daniel's life. What you might not know, because you probably remember this story from Sunday school as a kid growing up, maybe a picture Bible, nothing wrong with any of those things, but it sometimes gives us a wrong representation. So let me give you a little background just in case you've forgotten. Daniel grew up in Jerusalem, and when Nebuchadnezzar, leading the Babylonian Empire, came in and defeated the kingdom of Judah, he took about 25% of the population into captivity, what we know as the Babylonian captivity. God had prophesied through Jeremiah that it was going to last 70 years. And so at 15, Daniel goes. And throughout this series, we've looked at different events in both Daniel's life and in the life of people there in Babylon. His friends, King Nebuchadnezzar, King Belshazzar, all these things. And now it is about 65, maybe 68 years later. Daniel is not 15 anymore. Daniel is approaching 85. He's probably 82, 83 years old. He has lived through multiple regimes. King Nebuchadnezzar died. There was different fights for power, different kings that reigned for very brief periods of time. Eventually, his grandson Belshazzar ascended to the throne. And as we learned last week, at the end of the message last week, Belshazzar dies. The Babylonian Empire is laid in ruins. The Persian Empire is now the preeminent power in the world. So Daniel has outlived emperors and he's outlived empires. And here he is now, the Babylonian Empire laid to waste, and the Persian Empire is led by two men, Darius, who's a Mede, the Mede kingdom, and Cyrus, who's Persian, Cyrus the Great. And he is in this position of saying, now, what does it mean to serve in this new capacity? See, normally, as you know, even in U.S. politics, but normally a new administration takes charge and they remove all the previous people. The new president doesn't keep the old cabinet. He selects his own cabinet. But Daniel was of such wisdom, understanding, insight. He was so valuable that even if he wanted to retire, even if he wanted to say, I can't do this anymore, they wouldn't let him. They kept saying, we want you on our staff. And so here he is now, 82, 83 years old. He has distinguished himself so much that he is serving now under this new empire, these new rulers. And he stands out. So what we want to look at this morning is how can you be prepared when you must stand for God? When you must stand for God. Now, there's two ways that we can stand for God. We can stand out for God, and we can stand up for God. And we're going to look at both of those because Daniel stood out. There's a reason that they said we want this old man as our chief of staff, because he stood out in amazing ways. Here's what it says in Daniel chapter 6, starting in verse 3. Now, Daniel was so distinguished. He so distinguished himself among the other administrators and satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom. So Darius had 120 satraps. Over those, he had 3 administrators. Daniel was one of those 3, but Daniel stood out. He stood out for God in such an amazing way that Darius said, I'm going to put you in charge of the whole thing. So what does it mean? How do we learn to stand out for God? In this life, if you want to thrive in the storms, one thing you have to learn to do is stand out for God. There's so many Christians that don't stand out. We don't look any different, act any different, speak any different, sound any different, handle our money any different, have relationships that are anything different. We don't stand out. What we think is, I show up to church on Sunday. That makes me stand out. That does not make you stand out. I believe in coming to church on Sunday. I believe it's a place to be inspired, to be challenged, to grow in certain ways. I believe it's a great place to bring people to hear the Word of God and to maybe have them experience faith in Jesus Christ. But you don't stand out because you carve out an hour and a half on a Sunday morning. If you think that makes you stand out, you're missing the point. Standing out isn't what you do on a Sunday morning. Standing out is what you do the rest of your life, the rest of the week, at work, in your community, at the store, driving down the highway. How many of you intentionally don't have a church magnet or a Jesus fish on the back of your car? Because you say, the way I drive, I don't want anyone to know that I'm a Christian. Yes, one person's honest. For the longest time, I wouldn't do that. I would get other churches' bumper stickers and put them on. But the point is, we should stand out driving down the highway. I've had people flip me off, and I look and I go, oh, I'll see you in 10 minutes at church. You know who you are. No, we need to stand out in every area. So how did Daniel stand out? How is he so distinguished? What we just read, he distinguished himself by his exceptional qualities. So here's the first thing you need to realize. You stand out by your competence. Your competence, whether it's professional competence, your competence in different skills, in things that you've learned, you can always constantly be learning. You get this idea that here was Daniel at 15 and God gave him wisdom and understanding, but for the next almost 70 years, he just keeps learning and growing and becoming wiser with more understanding and more discernment. He's studying the culture. He's studying God's word. He's praying. He's understanding the situation and the times in which he's living in. And we're going to talk about that next week a little bit. He understood that he was living at a precipice in the moment in the life of the history of the nation of Israel. So he understood all those things. He kept growing. Here's one thing that's so important to learn, especially you younger people. When you're young, you rely on brute strength and ignorance. I can do it. I don't know how I'll do it, but by gosh, I'll just figure it out. I'll try hard. When you get older, you don't have so much brute strength. Hopefully, you also have less ignorance. Hopefully you've learned and you've grown. Here's the whole point. Physical skills may diminish, they may decline, but competency can always increase. You can have more competency, more wisdom, more insight at 85 than you did at 70 or 60 or 50. Constantly, and we talked about this last week, constantly learn, constantly grow. If you want to stand out for God, develop competency in whatever area in which you work, live, play, you're involved. Be able to speak intelligently to things. There are times when people need your physical skills. There are other times where they need your competency. I was talking to my dad yesterday. He is in his early 70s. He just had to go to the cardiologist and had a cardiocath. And so I'm talking to him. I said, Dad, I'm not asking you to do anything. I need to ask you a question. How do I do this? And he's, do this, do this. He knew. He just knew it. Because he's always learning. This guy's learning stuff on his phone. He's got a cataract in one eye, so he's learning stuff on the phone. He's watching us online, Dad. I love you. But always grow. Always develop that competency. That is a huge way you stand out for God. Then it goes on and says this. At this time, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to find anything. So basically what it's saying is they found out that Darius wants to put Daniel in charge, and they don't like it. They're not happy with it. They're jealous. They're envious. They don't trust it. Whatever it is, they think it should be their position. It should be them who are recognized. And so they say, we're going to take Daniel out. So they're looking for some way to bring an accusation against him, but they're unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. He stood out by God. So he stood out for God in the second way, and it's how we need to stand out for God, and it's this. Stand out by your character. Stand out by your character. Stand out by your character. Oh, to God that we had men and women in politics in the U.S. today that we could say we can't find anything to accuse them of. There's no corruption. They're diligent. They're hard. Daniel showed up. He worked hard. He was faithful. He was committed. Whoever was in authority over him, he recognized. He was submitted to them, not in a dictatorial way, not in an unhealthy way, but he honored those that were in authority to him. He never chafed against it. He said, if God's placed you here, God's placed me there, that's fine. I can deal with this. And his character stood out, so much so that he was going to be promoted. So if you want to stand out for God, not only should you continue to grow in competency, your character should be exemplary. It should shine. Now, I know what some of you think. Well, I've blown it in the past. Okay, you can't go back and undo your character flaws from the past. But you can, by God's grace and by the transforming work of the Holy Spirit, develop character moving forward. How do you do it? Now, this is so simple. I'm telling you, do it one day at a time. What we want to do is say, I can't be honest for the rest of my life. I'm not asking you to be honest for the rest of your life. I'm asking you to be honest for the next 24 hours. Can you do that? If that's too big of an ask, say, can I be honest for the next hour? If you say, I can't be honest for an hour, can I be honest for 1 minute? Don't look, I'm in bondage to drugs, alcohol, pornography. I know I can't go the rest of my life without looking at anything. Can you go the next 5 minutes? If you can do 5 minutes, praise God. Now do 5 more minutes and 5 more minutes. Develop character one day, one moment at a time. Otherwise, you'll feel overwhelmed by it because all you'll remember is the past mistakes. Now, let me just add to that. Once you start doing and developing character, it's one day at a time. Don't ever look back. Because we'll lie to ourselves. I haven't drank anything for 4 months. I've earned it. Develop character. Doesn't matter how long you haven't done it. And it doesn't matter how much life you have in front of you. Today, I'm going to be a woman of character. Don't you want that said about you? We've looked and looked. If we can't find anything, we know he's got one weak point, and here it is. Unless we find something to do with the law of his God. In other words, they said, he's not corrupt. He doesn't take a bribe. He shows up. He's all those things. But we know where he stands in his faith. And so if you want to stand out for God, the third thing is this. Stand out by your commitment to God. Stand out by your commitment, your public commitment. People ought to know. Listen, you can believe anything privately, but you can only be a Christian publicly. There is no such thing as a private Christian. If you deny me before men, Jesus said, I'll deny you before my Father. You, at some point, you have to know it, say it, spray it, display it, show it, whatever it is, put the bumper sticker on your car, but find some way that you say, I'm a Christian. This is what I believe. And people ought to know it. They ought to see it in your life and know that if they're going to find any way in which to come against you, they're going to come against you in your place of greatest strength, which is your commitment. See, if he had compromised, they could have found a weak place. His character. If he wasn't growing and learning and developing competency, they could have attacked him there. He would have had a weak place. But if he's strong in his faith and they're going to attack, they're attacking in his strongest place. And they're attacking where God is. And it's incredibly important to understand this. If you're going to stand for God, you have to stand out for God. You have to stand out by your commitment. But when the attacks come, remember they're not coming from people. So when you stand out for God, it's a wonderful thing. Daniel stood out for God. And as a result of standing out for God, he painted a giant target on his chest. So I'm going to warn you. These first 3 things that we talked about are wonderful and awesome, and you ought to stand out for God through your competency, through your character, and through your commitment. But the more you stand out, the more you attract attacks. The greater the attacks will come. But don't think that the attacks are really from people. They may generate from a person, but the Bible teaches us, Paul says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and rulers of this dark age. The attacks aren't from really people. It's the mind behind the mind. It's the enemy of our souls. It's Satan. It's the great dragon. It's the devil. I don't care what you want to call him. I'm just saying that is the source of the attacks. When you stand out for God, the enemy is going to come at you with everything he has. And so here he is working through these people. Convince the king to pass a national law to take one person out. That's a lot of adversity. That's a lot of attack. So here's what it says in Daniel, verse 6. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or any human being for these next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians. So they want to take Daniel out and they say, we know Daniel, and he stands out because of his commitment. And so the one area where he's strongest is where they're going to attack him. They said, make a law. No one anywhere can pray to any god or any human except to you, King Darius, just for 30 days. And then they throw this on there, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians. And you might say, what is that? It's a famous law in history. The Persian Empire operated under this. It was meant to somewhat constrain the power of the emperor. In other words, you couldn't just pass laws indiscriminately. And what it said was if he passed an edict, a law, and he put it in writing, that it was fixed. It could not be repealed. It could not be reversed. It could not be taken away, not even by the king himself. So it was set. So Darius says, I like this. Everyone should pray to me for 30 days. My ego is not big enough. So, yes, I like this. So he passes the law. He passes this edict, and it can't be reversed. Now, at this point, Daniel doesn't know anything about this. But when he finds out, he's going to have some choices. See, we think Daniel didn't have choices. Daniel had choices. We all have choices. There's a lot of things he could have done. He could have gone along with it. Just said, oh, fine, I won't pray. I won't pray for the next 30 days. Even if I don't agree with the law, even if I think it's wrong, I'll go along with it. I just want to fit in. He could have publicly protested, right? He could have made a sign, went up to the palace stairs, and the sign says, I won't pray as you say. I won't pray. He could have publicly protested. It wouldn't have changed anything. The law couldn't be reversed. He could have done it. He would have maybe felt better, but it wouldn't have changed anything. He could have privately made an appeal to Darius. Darius obviously liked him. Darius had a great affinity for him. Darius was going to set him over the whole kingdom. He could have went up to the emperor and said, now, Darius, please don't make me do this. Please, I'm asking you. I'm a man of commitment to my God. I know you put this in law, but don't make me do this. He could have just prayed in private. I'll just pray in private. Nobody will see. Nobody will know. And I know what some of you are thinking. What's the matter with that? The problem with that, this is huge. The problem with that is if you will back down in public, eventually you will shrink away in private. I don't care what you think. I know everyone believes I can live a private life and be a person committed to God, and I don't need to show up to church. I'm telling you, I know very, very, very few people who over a long period of time have no public display of their faith that continue to live it out in private. I'm not saying they don't exist. I just don't know them. You know, if you want to pull somebody out of the weeds living in a monastery somewhere, fine. I'm wrong. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying for most of us, if we don't publicly live our faith privately, it dwindles away, it diminishes, it gets weakened, and eventually it's... Or Daniel could choose to do what he's always done and continue to pray to God. To pray consistently and regularly. The question is not so much what does Daniel choose. The question is, what would you choose? Would you choose the easy way, the comfortable way? Would you choose the public display? I'm going to be this person. I'm going to go down. Or would you say, I'm just going to quietly live my faith the way I always have in the face of people, but not clamoring, not trying to draw attention. I'm going to live the way I've always lived, as a person of faith, of character, competency, and commitment. So what does Daniel choose? Here's what it says. It says, now Daniel learned that the decree had been published. And what did he do? He went home to his upstairs room, where the windows opened towards Jerusalem, towards his hometown, towards where the temple to his God had been built. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. It was what he'd always done. He didn't change. He didn't give in. He didn't cave. He didn't just say, I just want to get by. It's 30 days, not a big deal. He said, I'm going to do what I've always done. And that is what they were planning. That's what they were banking on. These satraps and administrators, they were banking on his commitment to God. And so they're waiting. And they see him go up to the room. And they say, we've got him. And they charge into the room. It was a setup. They charge into the room, and there he is, praying to God. And they say, now we've got him. Now we've got a basis. He has violated the law. We've got him. So they go and they report to King Darius. King Darius, didn't you enact this edict that says no one can pray? And he said, yes, I did. And they said, now remember, it can't be revoked. He said, yes, I know. They said, Daniel's guilty. When he found out it was Daniel, he was heartbroken. The Bible tells us he didn't sleep all night. He didn't eat. He looked for some way. He kept trying. There's got to be some loophole here. There's got to be some way in which I can get Daniel out of this. But he couldn't find anything. He was so distraught. He realized that his own ego is going to cost him the life of his most trusted advisor, someone he valued, someone he looked to, and someone he respected. But there was nothing he could do. And so what does Daniel do? How is it that Daniel can stand out for God in such a way, and then when his life is on the line, still stand up for God? How is it that Daniel's able to stand up for God in the face of fear? Because fear is real. Listen to me. Standing out for God can be fearful. Standing up for God can be terrifying. You may not be threatened with a lion's den, but it can be terrifying. You might lose a job, you might lose a position, you might lose a contract, you might lose a partnership, you might lose a promotion, you might lose a friend, you might lose your reputation. There's all kinds of things that it can cost you. And you say, I don't know if I have the intestinal fortitude to do this. How was Daniel able to stand up for God in the midst of knowing his life hung in the balance? Here's what it says in verse 19. It says, verse 16. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. So Darius called Daniel. He said, I have to do this. I have no choice. My hands are tied. I wrote the law. I'm bound by the law. So as they're taking Daniel, about to throw him into the pit of lions, that's what Darius says to him. May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. If you're going to stand up for God, one thing is this. You stand up by remembering God's faithfulness. You stand up by remembering God's faithfulness. You stand up by remembering God. Darius is reminding Daniel, you've been faithful to God. God's been faithful to you. God was faithful when the unexpected happened and he saw you through it. God was faithful when you were challenged to compromise your beliefs. God was faithful when you needed the impossible. God was faithful in all these times in your life. You've been faithful to God. Don't forget that. See, when you have to stand up for God, remember, if you've been faithful to God, God will be faithful to you. Darius is reminding Daniel of this. But here's the great thing as Christians. Yes, we ought to be faithful to God. But never forget this. Even when you're not faithful, God is always, always, always faithful. See, we can all look back, just like the times when we've lacked character. We can look back at those times when we caved to the pressure, when we didn't stand up, when we weren't faithful, when the pressure was on and we folded like a cheap suit. And we say, well, God's done with me. God, if I wasn't faithful to God, God won't be faithful to me. But here's what it says in 2 Timothy. It was one of my favorite verses. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. Praise God. Praise God. Who here has never wavered in their faith to God? God has never wavered in his faithfulness to you. And that ought to give you great courage. I'm going to stand up. God's going to be faithful to you. I know I blew it yesterday. I know I didn't stand the way I should have last week, last month, last year. But now it's a new moment, and I have this opportunity, and God's not holding all those times against me and saying, well, you're on your own now, bucko. He says, I will always, always, always be faithful. If you want to stand in those moments, remember God's faithfulness. Now, it helps if you have some history of being faithful yourself. I'm not saying just don't even try. Try and be faithful. Exercise that. Because then you have these moments where you say, I was faithful and I saw God's faithfulness. And it gives you the courage to stand up. The next thing is this. You stand up by connecting with God consistently. We read this earlier. It says Daniel prayed to God, as he always had, 3 times a day. Listen to me. What that's telling us is that Daniel regularly communicated with God. He spent time on his knees, praying, talking, hearing the heart of God, pressing in, interceding for the people, asking for wisdom, looking for knowledge. If you're going to stand for somebody, you better know who you're standing for. If you're going to stand up for God, doesn't it help to know him? And you know him best when you connect with him most. So connect with God consistently. Pray regularly. I know people that I can't pray for more than 30 seconds. Fine. Pray for 30 seconds, 40 times a day. There's nothing wrong with that. But just pray. Pray regularly. Pray consistently. Make it something that's part of your life. Connect to God. Why? Because the more you get on your knees in prayer, the greater your ability to stand under pressure will be. Now, you might not literally get on your knees. That's fine. It's a figure of speech. Please don't come to me and say, I can't kneel, I have a bad knee. I guess I can't pray. You can pray standing. You can pray with your eyes closed. You can pray with your eyes open. You can pray with your hands folded. You can pray with your hands lifted. You can pray driving down the highway. You can pray sitting at your kitchen table. You can pray in your shower. You can pray anywhere. But pray regularly and consistently. The more you pray, the greater your ability to stand under pressure will be. So if you want to stand up for God, you stand up for God by connecting with him consistently, by remembering his faithfulness. And then it goes on and says this. It says, at the first light of dawn, so they throw Daniel in. The king can't sleep all night. But at the first light of dawn, the king got up, hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel. Darius had faith. You don't call to somebody who's been torn to shreds by lions. He believed that Daniel would be alive. He called to Daniel in an anguished voice and said, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. So listen, here's the third thing. If you want to stand up for God, what you need to remember is this. You stand up by reminding yourself that the result is greater than the risk. The result is greater than the risk. The potential of what God is going to do is always greater than what you might lose. You say, but what if God doesn't do it? The result is greater. You know where you end up? Heaven. I know some of you are like, that doesn't sound good. Trust me, it's better than earth. If you're a Christian, right? If you're a Christian, earth is the closest to hell you're ever going to get. If you're not a Christian, earth is the closest to heaven you're ever going to get. And heaven is going to be spectacular. It's not just floating around in a cloud with a halo and a harp. You know, we're going to explore and learn and grow, and it's going to be a wonderful thing. We're going to see a new heaven and a new earth. It's going to be better than you can imagine. But the result is always greater than the risk. Even if you don't lose your life, if you lose everything, you have to say, God, if I lose everything and I still have you, what have I really lost? So I'll risk everything. Listen, there are so many Christians, especially Westerners, who have never seen a genuine, bona fide miracle, a supernatural miracle. I'm not talking about the miracle of a birth. That's wonderful and awesome. I mean a supernatural miracle. Because most of us won't ever risk anything. We won't step out on a limb. We won't get to that point where the only thing that we need and the only thing that can save us, the only thing that can solve this issue is a miracle. We never get to the point where we say, if God doesn't do something, there is nothing else. Please hear me. I'm not talking about presuming on God. I'm not talking about being foolish. I'm not talking about taking unnecessary chances. I'm not going to ever take advantage of modern medicine. I'm talking about stepping out in faith and believing. I've never seen anybody healed. Have you ever stood in faith and prayed for someone to be healed? And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't pray for healing at church. Please hear me. I've seen healing happen in church settings. But I don't mean just in the safety of a Sunday morning at church. What about at your place of work? What about at the grocery store? What about at the ball field? Have you ever said, let me pray for you? I think God wants, can I share something? I don't know if this is going to mean anything to you, but I'm sitting here and I thought, God might want you to know that you're loved. And you share some kind of word of knowledge or some encouragement, and it makes all the difference in their life. You don't ever see that because you never risk it. If you don't risk it, you're never going to see it. You may never, ever, ever see a miracle until you risk something. At some point, we have to say, I'm going to step out, take a chance, where the only way I can see and get what I need to see and get is if God moves supernaturally. Beyond that, there's always risk. There's always risk. Listen to me. At some point, we may, here in America, have things, laws that are passed that we have to as Christians, as followers of Christ, decide, can I do that or can I not do that? Here's what it says in the book of Acts. It says, Peter and the apostles replied, we must obey God rather than human beings. At some point, we may have to say, I can't be a party to this. I can't do this. But you're going to risk something. You may lose your business. You may lose your home. You may lose at some point in the future your freedom. Now, please hear me. I know some of you are politically oriented. And what you hear is, yes, I'm fighting for the words of the Bill of Rights. This is not about the words of the Bill of Rights. This is about the words in the Word of God. That my allegiance is highest to the Word of God, not to any democracy, not to any constitution, not any of those things. Because there are things and freedoms and rights we have in this country that aren't biblical. And some of you exercise them. And so at some point you have to say, just because I have the right to do it doesn't mean I ought to do it. I have to be a person who says, I will not go against, I will not compromise, I will not shrink back from what God says clearly in His Word. It's the willingness to stand out and to stand up. And sometimes it means in your own life standing up against sin. We make it so stinking easy for ourselves. I just want to fit in. I want to be liked. I don't want to be ostracized. I don't want to be blackballed. I don't want to, not be invited. And so we justify sleeping together and living together and supporting all kinds of things that God's Word is clearly against. And we say, but I have the right. As Christians, your rights start and end with God's revealed Word. That's what you have to base that on. If you're going to oppose a law that a nation may pass, an edict that a person may enforce upon you, don't make it about, this is violating this amendment or that amendment. If you want to do that in the civil realm, fine, do that as a civil realm. Don't do it as a Christian. Do it as an American. But if you're standing for God, make sure it's because it's violating God's standards, God's Word. And it's being imposed on you as a person. And there's a huge difference. They're not making you do it, then don't worry about it. So, at some point, you have to say, I'm going to stand up for God. I'm going to stand up for God, and the risk is worth it. The risk, what I'm risking, the result may be worth it. And then this is what it says. It says, when Daniel was lifted from the pit, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in God. Have you ever been lifted from a pit? Has God ever rescued you from something? When He does, it's amazing, it's awesome. And He'll rescue you oftentimes as a result of you standing up for Him. But maybe some of you are in a pit right now. You're in a pit of your own making. You're in a pit of your own doing. You're in a pit that someone else created for you and threw you in. But you're in a pit and you're wondering, are you ever going to get out? I'm telling you, stand up for God. Just stand up for Him. Say, I'm going to stand up for God and watch what He does. He'll deliver you in supernatural ways because the result is always worth the risk. So stand up. Be a person of commitment and character. Remember God's faithfulness. Connect with God consistently. And watch what God can do. And this is what it says as a result of all this. It says, Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. He prospered. Did he financially prosper? Perhaps. Did he prosper in his career? Perhaps. We know for sure he prospered supernaturally. So much of the rest of the book of Daniel, and we're not going to get into the rest of the book of Daniel except for chapter 9 next week, is about these amazing insights that God blesses Daniel with about what's going to happen in the future, at the end of human history. Things that no one else at that point had seen, and maybe only one other person, human being, throughout history has known. John the Revelator, book of Revelation. Things that he saw and were revealed to him that scholars have been studying and looking at for centuries. God blessed him in amazing ways. Why? Because he stood for God. So remember this, when you stand for God, God will stand for you. When you stand for God, God will stand for you. But it can be hard. I'm telling you, in my own life, there are times I've had to stand. I've had to make a stand. Stand out for God. I've had to stand up for God. And every time I've had to do it, I'm terrified. Now, maybe you want a pastor who's never afraid. You've got the wrong pastor. Okay, I'm scared. I don't want to do this. I know what it's going to cost me. Well, I have an idea of what it's going to cost me. I have an idea of the hit I'm going to take, whether it's financially, whether it's relationally, whether it's positionally. But I've always, at the end, to the best of my ability, walked out on a limb and said, I'll stand. Because I didn't want anything to ever hold me back from what God had. Especially, I didn't want the enemy of my soul to hold me back. Because he's there and he's saying, what I want more than anything is to keep you from fulfilling the plans and the purposes and the destiny I have for you. And if you'll shrink back from standing for God, you'll never step into the fullness of what God has. So what we need today are Daniels. We need courageous women who say, I will not let anything hold me back from what God has called me to. We need courageous men, old men, young men, and every age in between that says, I will not let anything hold me back from what God has called me to do, who He's called me to be. I want to be that person who stands out for God and who stands up for God. And when you stand for God in both of those ways, what you have to realize is this: you're also standing against the powers of darkness, not against human beings. Don't conflate them. Ultimately, what you're standing against is the powers of darkness. God wants you to do something amazing for Him. Don't allow yourself to be held back by the enemy of your soul. And he wants to hold you back. And so what we're going to do in just a moment is we're going to sing a song. And it's a little bit of a different style of a song. Some of you may have heard it, some of you may have not. But it's called Don't Tread on Me. And this is a warring song. This is a song of declaration. We're actually speaking against the powers of hell. You've come against the King. You've come against the crown. You've come against Jesus Himself. And you're not going to win. And you're not going to hold me back. I'm going to step into all that God has for me. So if that's you this morning and you say, I want to stand for God and stand against the enemy, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Don't do this if you don't mean it, because I'm telling you, life's going to get hard. Don't come and say, Pastor, you didn't tell me this was going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's not going to be fun. Attacks are never fun, but the result is always worth it. So if you'd say, I want to stand for God, right where you are, I'm going to count to 3. And if you say I'm going to have the boldness to stand up for God, you just stand up. If you don't, then everyone's going to look at you. No. No, then that's between you and God. But this is a public stand. This isn't everyone close their eyes, bow their heads, nobody needs to know. This is a public stand. So if you're saying, I'm going to stand for God. I'm going to stand against the powers of darkness, the powers of the enemy. If that's you right now, and I count to 3, you stand to your feet. Be bold. 1, who's going to do this? I hope someone's doing it. Pastor, don't let me down. All right. 2, I know my kid's going to stand up, right? My kids, I got at least a few of you. Okay, now 1, 2, 3. Let's stand for God. Now, we're going to sing this song as a declaration. If you don't know the words, they'll be up on the screen, but let's sing this as a declaration to God.